On. Okay, back to brachos. Okay, we learned that if you eat a proper amount, then you have to make a bracha and an after bracha. But even when you eat, let's say, a kazayas of liquid, of solid, or a vias of liquid, it has to still be done within a certain time frame. If it has to be done what's called bechdei achilas pras. Like we learned by matzah. Remember, we learned when you eat matzah, you have to eat a kazayas within a certain amount of time, because otherwise it's not called eating, and that then you didn't eat a kazayas. Eating is when you eat a certain amount of food within a certain time frame. So gedei achilas pras, again, in halacha goes from anywhere from 2 minutes to 11 minutes. The accepted opinion is more 4 to 7 minutes, between 4 and 7 minutes. Where this is a very practical din is as follows. If somebody is drinking a hot cup of coffee or a hot cup of tea, they're not drinking it, they're sipping it. So in order to make an after bracha on the coffee or tea or any other hot drinks, whatever, you have to drink a revius of it within 4 minutes or even up to 7 minutes. But it's going to take you 10 minutes to drink 3 ounces of coffee, then you can't make an after bracha after it, because again, you didn't drink a revius in that proper amount of time. In fact, even by a revius, there are opinions in halacha that the only time you make an after bracha on a revius is you drink a revius at one time. Now, the Rebbe holds like the opinion that say, no, it could be spread out, bechdei achilas pras. By the way, it's interesting. Pras is the amount of time it takes to eat 3 eggs. Pras means a half, gedei achilas pras means a half amount of time to take 6 eggs, which is the amount of time it takes to eat 3 eggs. Now in halacha, it varies between 2 minutes and 11 minutes. Not less than 2 minutes, not more than 11 minutes. But those are, wow. But again, it's 4 to 7 minutes. So people have to be careful. Many people also, they're drinking water. So they take a little sip, 10 minutes later, take another sip. In that way, you're not going to be able to make an after bracha on the water because you didn't drink it within the proper amount of time. In fact, some people discuss also what happens, I don't know why it's an issue, but they talk, let's say, very cold ice cream. So again, if it's going to take you longer than 7 minutes to eat a kazayas of ice cream, which is an ounce of, I don't see why that's such a big deal. It makes more sense when things are very hot. People just sip it. So you have to be aware that you can't make a kazayas, an after bracha, unless you eat a kazayas within a certain amount of time. Okay, the whiskey we discussed then last time also. Okay. Somebody saying something? Okay, no. All right, now, we mentioned like this. The after bracha, there's 3 after brachas. There's berachas hamazon, which is benching after bread. And then you have berachas, what's called in halacha me'ein shalish, part of the 3, because it's a combination of the 3 brachas of benching. And then you have beri nefashos. Now, on bread, which the definition of bread is flour and water baked. That's the general concept of bread. Flour and water baked. So then you have to make a meitzi. Again, to make al netilas yadayim, we learned you have to eat 2 ounces of bread. Otherwise, you wash without saying al netilas yadayim. If you order to make you eat a piece of bread, flour and water baked. So if you eat a kazayas, then you have to do berachas hamazon. If you made al michya, you did not fulfill your obligation. If you made a beri nefashos, it's not fulfilling your obligation. The bracha beri nefashos is not an after bracha like shahakol is a before bracha. In other words, shahakol is a bracha b'diavad, even if you made on bread. Let's say you said a shahakol by mistake, or you didn't know. You just made shahakol niya b'dvarim. And it ended up to be bread, so then it's a good bracha. You don't have to say hameitzi again. But if somebody ate bread and by mistake, instead of benching, they made a beri nefashos, or they were too lazy, they said, okay, you know what, instead of benching, I'll just do a beri nefashos or al michya. Number 1, they said a bracha in vain, because they weren't allowed to say that bracha, and they're not yet to benching, they still have to bench anyway. So the situation is like this. Bread, flour and water baked is berachas hamazon. Flour and water cooked is not bread, Because bread by definition is when it's baked. So if you have flour and water and you cook it, let's say you make a matzah ball, right? Out of matzah, which is flour, and then you bake it. You cook it. So on a matzah ball, you would make a mezainis, even though it's flour and water. Flour and water is only hamaitzi, and birchas hamazon, benching, is only if it's baked. If it's cooked, not only is that interesting din, you can have 20 ounces of cooked flour and water and you eat it, you still don't bench. Okay? We'll learn, as we get there, flour and juice. Okay, so if you eat a lesser amount, you make halachos. If you eat a lot of flour and water cake, flour and juice cake, so then you have to wash and bench on it. But cooking, always keep what?
So, you go camping, you make a fire, you put there's a recipe specific for like camping bread, they call it. You put the ingredients together, you wrap it in foil, and you put it on the fire itself. You're not really baking it though, or is that still considered baking?
That's roasting it.
Right.
Roasting is not the prominence of bread. I'm not have to double check about roasting because it doesn't say that in clear cut halacha, but it would probably be a mezainis. Because bread is considered choshev when it's baked. As we learned in Hilchos Shabbos, there is baking, cooking, frying, and roasting. Each one is a different din. Okay?
The original matzot, for example.
With flour and water.
Yeah, but the way they were cooked was on the drums, right? They put them on the back, they slapped it on the drum.
But it's baked in heat. Not in direct fire, they're baked in heat.
No, that's not cooked.
That's not cooked. Cooked.
I made it on a skillet.
Okay. Cooked is when there's water. Fried is when there's a little bit of oil. 1 second. Then you have baking is when it's heated with heat, not directly with fire. And roasting is when it's over a fire. There are 4 different categories in Hilchos Shabbos and a lot of other halachos also. So if somebody bakes bread, flour and water, then it becomes hametzi to begin with, and you have to do berachas hamazon afterwards. If it's cooked, it's mezainis and alamichya, no matter how much of it you eat. So therefore, now, then you have, let's explain it like this. Shivas haminim, alamichya, and benching is only for those things, the 7 minim, that Eretz Yisrael was praised with. Okay? Now we know the pasuk says, the land of Eretz Yisrael is, as the pasuk says, Eretz chita, which is wheat, se'era barley, gefen grapes, ta'ena is figs, rimim pomegranates, zei shemen is olives, and dvash is dates. Okay? So there's 2 grains, wheat and barley, but the wheat and barley have offshoots. So basically the 5 grains, which are offshoots of chita and se'era, is wheat, barley, rye, oat, and spelt. Okay? Those are the 5 grains. Now, besides that, you have the other 5 fruits that Eretz Yisrael was praised with. You have grapes and figs and dates and pomegranates and olives. Okay? So because those things are unique, that the Torah gives a special praise of Eretz Yisrael with these things, so there's a special after bracha after them. And that bracha is ala michya, or ala gefen if it's wine, or ala eitz valpriya eitz if it's one of those 5 fruits. Okay? So normally after food, the after bracha would be bury nefashos. If it's something, the 7 minim, so again, is the bracha ala michya. If it's one of the 5 grains with water and baked, then it becomes birchas hamazon. So it's a very logical concept. Bread is unique, but the uniqueness of bread is only flour and water baked. Okay, flour and water cooked, we just said, is mezainis. It's not a prominent food. So it's like any other cake. Now cake, what?
If you said by mistake, if you said how many you said shakol, you still bench for
Yeah, what the bracha rishon has nothing to do with the after bracha. In other words, one second, if somebody by mistake on bread made a shahakol, okay, and they ate the bread, so afterwards you have to do birchas hamazon anyway. There was a time, there's an expression in Yiddish, and what's translated into English. If you don't wash, you don't have to bench. So people meaning if it's not bread, if you don't wash, because it's not bread, so then you don't have to bench, you have to do ala michya. So some people want to take it literal. If I eat bread without washing, so because I didn't wash, you don't have to bench. Which is mamish wrong. Okay, but one thing has nothing to do with the next. You make a shackle by mistake on bread, it's good, and then you have to bench. What?
If something is cooked, and now you bake it like mosaics. If it's like a bagel. Bagel is first boiled, and then you bake it. So now it takes it always takes the form of the last action that was.
As far as brachas go, it's like this. If it's baked, it's hametzi. If it's cooked, it's mezainis. Correct? Now, what happens if you bake it and then you cook it? What happens if you bake it and then you cook it? I'll give you a simple example. Matzah mel. Matzah mel is ground up matzah, right? So it's baked. So it's really baked and it's ground up. Now you make a matzah ball with it and now you cook it in the soup. So now that matzah mel, even though originally it would be hametzi, if you would eat plain matzah mel, it's hametzi because it's flour and water. That's what, and baked. So now the din is, Al Rebbe holds in Birchas HaNenen, that if you have baked, it's hametzi. Then what happens if you cook it afterwards? It becomes a mezainis. What happens if after that you baked it again? It becomes hametzi again. If you cook it again, it's going to become mezainis. You bake it again, it's going to become hametzi. So it's in that din, and very dry, probably tasteless also. But the din is, in that case, of if it's mezainis or hametzi, it depends what the last thing was that you did to it.
So how come by
French toast? No.
You do hametzi?
Yeah. French toast you do hametzi because it's really, you don't bake it. You fry it. The question is, that we'll get into. I want to jump all the guns because we'll learn that then later, that a little bit of oil in the pan is not called frying. It's, huh? No, I know what I said. A little bit of oil that you put at the bottom of the pan, and then you heat up something in that pan. It's not called frying. Frying is when you have deep fry. Okay? Deep fry is a shaila. In halacha, is it a hametzi or mezainis or whatever it is. Okay? But a little bit of oil, the Alter Rebbe says the ksas oil, this asin that it shouldn't stick, you know what I mean? That's not called frying. Now, if somebody, the way fried toast, French toast is made, you take bread, then you dip it with eggs or whatever, milk, whatever junk you put on. Don't give out recipes, I keep them for myself. So then you fry it in a frying pan. It's not really anything but hametzi because you're not really frying it. Some people would take a little piece of bread, real hametzi, simple hametzi, make a bracha hametzi, then eat it, and they would bench on it. But if push comes to shove, if you have French toast, it's not a deep, French fries, you do a deep fry, right? So, but it was French fries, it's Adam anyway. But I'm saying if somebody would make bread like that, then it's a machlekes if it's a hametzi mezainis. Huh? But lepeil bagels are cooked and then they're baked. So we've gone to this deep fry. So the Alter Rebbe Paskins basically it has a din of baking.
What's the ruling that there's no baking after cooking? Before I remember you used to say there's no baking after cooking, right?
No. In Hilchos Shabbos, there is baking after cooking, and there is cooking after baking. There's no cooking after cooking, no baking after baking. But as far as brachas go, okay, let me tell you an example that my son's going to get excited over. You make lasagna. I'm fighting with the whole world about this, but according to Alter Rebbe, there's no question in halacha it's hametzi. You take lasagna strips, yeah? Those lasagna strips are made out of flour and water. They're not like egg noodles that are made flour and juice, eggs, okay? They're made actually flour and water. You cook them to soften them, right? That's what people do. Then you put the cheese with the whatever junk you put in there, the tomato sauce, whatever you put in, yeah? What? Yeah, so then you put in that stuff. And then what do you do afterwards? You bake it in the oven. So now, those sheets are a meitzi, it's flour and water. Now you cook them, so they became a mazenis. Now you add all the other ingredients, but now you bake it. So according to Alter Rebbe, it's a meitzi. There are other opinions that say that even if it's loaded with cheese and things like that, it becomes a mazenis. But the Alter Rebbe clearly does not hold like that, and the Alter Rebbe holds that it's, even if there's cheese inside or things like that inside, it's definitely hametzi. So I've heard ideas unbelievable. One guy says, well, because you put tomato sauce in the lasagna, it's not baking, it's cooking.
You boil it.
You bake it in the oven. It's called baking in English, and according to halacha, you don't cook it.
So if I were to take noodles.
What type of noodles?
Lasagna noodles.
Lasagna is hametzi. I have regular noodles that you
They're made from the same ingredients, right?
No, they're not.
They are.
I heard from the guys that make it.
Put that aside for a moment. You take the lasagna strips, as you call them.
Yeah.
You put them in water.
You cook it.
Right? And then you take that pan that you've got it sitting in water, and you put that pan in the oven. Now
No, that's not the story here. Over there, it's in the oven with a lot of water. That's questionable if it's not baking. That's not baking.
Try to make lasagna with
Or if
They
your
stay
oven
hard.
also produces steam, is it still hametzi?
Yeah.
Even if it's
Not if it's
the water
if you
that makes
put
it soft.
if you put lasagna in water and bake in the oven.
yeah,
But who puts it in a lot of water?
they do it. The tomato sauce is very juicy.
The tomato sauce is not water. And it's not called cooking. It's called baking. Ask anybody logistic what.
What if the oven is making steam?
If the oven is making steam, you unsteam it.
Isn't the rule that if you put it back in the oven for the sake of melting the cheese and the sauce, but not to cook it more?
You're baking it. Bottom line is you're baking.
They're not changing the.
It's not true. You put it back. Look in the recipes. Put it back in the oven and bake for 20 minutes.
So in yeshiva, sometimes because they have to feed a lot of people, they make macaroni and cheese. After they cook it, they put it in the oven.
That's to eat it up. That's not going to be. And again, the macaroni and cheese is mazenis, because it's not flour and water. It's flour and eggs.